So welcome to the Parent Academy to Go. My name is Norca Padilla, and I am an instructional specialist with the Office of Student Family Support and Engagement. We're so delighted to have you here this evening. This evening we are with the Improving Family Life While Working from Home, and our presenter is Nicoletta Pichard, and we're so honored to have her here this evening. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Every time I look at this slide with this dad who's clearly just sitting there going, what else? Just go play. I am reminded of the time when I started working from home. This was several years ago, and I didn't have an office. I didn't even have a desk, and I started working from my dining room table. And as you can imagine, something very magical happened, even though I didn't want it to happen at that time. Every time I would sit down at the computer, at the dining room table, it was like a magnet had been turned on, because just as soon as I was working, my kids would come in with important questions, with things that they really needed to discuss with me. And while I was excited that they were looking to connect with me, I was so frustrated that it was always at the time that I was trying to get some work done. And I don't know how this sits for all of you or how you can relate to this, but to me, finding that balance of working at home, especially when you don't have an office, when you don't have a place to go away, that's really an important part. So I'm very excited to be here tonight and welcome all of you, whether you are listening to this after the fact or you're joining us this evening. Welcome. I'm excited to be here. My name is Nicoletta Pichardo, and I'm here on behalf of PEP tonight. PEP is the Parent Encouragement Program, and PEP is dedicated to helping parents find new tools. You know, we have a lifelong of learning, of improving our skills at work, of improving our skills in all sorts of areas, and PEP is dedicated to helping parents enjoy parentinghood again, enjoy the time with our kids by giving practical tools, and by just sharing some strategy to make life a little easier. Now, professionally, I'm a life strategy coach, and all that means is that I help people go from where they currently are and bridge that gap to where they really want to be. I came to PEP when my kids were in 5th and 8th grade, and things were not so easy with my daughter at the time. I remember there were lots of slammed doors. My son had been diagnosed with dyslexia very late in the game, so he was completely disappointed and had a real lack of a drive. And I came to PEP because for me it was clear either my kids were going to have to go into therapy or something, or I needed to change something. And this was sort of the last thing that I was willing to try before I got some other assistance. And something magical began to happen. Not only was I able to have a more positive impact in the lives of my kids, our relationships got better, the doors didn't slam anymore, and the biggest gift for me was my son, who was so discouraged initially, was participating again. He was showing an interest again in school, and that was with one class. Ever since then, I've been involved with PEP. I took all of their classes and joined the leadership team because I'm very passionate about the impact that it's brought in the relationships of my children, my family life. And I really want to share this with everyone here tonight, because if you're here, I know that you're committed to doing something nice for your family. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we have a small group here, but it'd be great to know if you could just put in the chat the ages of your children. So I've got an idea. So everything I'm going to share with you tonight is going to be applicable to the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, and the 15-year-old. However, if I know the ages, then I can tweak it a little bit, or I might give you some strategies that are more applicable to a younger child or an older child. So if you can have a chance, just put the names of or the ages of your children in the chat. Now, what are we going to cover today? Oops. Actually.
So we have ages from 6 to 9 to 12 to 14 to 16.
Wow, we've got the whole age, and I see there's no 2-year-olds in here, so that's good to know so far. And don't worry, I mean, you can use all this with a 2-year-old. It's just good to know. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about positive parenting and some tools. So the 3 tools we're going to talk about today is how do you gain your child's cooperation? How do you promote self-discipline and discipline in general? And how do you solve problems together? Now, it might seem all very simple. And what I'm sharing you today is an approach called positive parenting. Why? Because wherever focus goes, energy flows. And you might have had a parent a little bit like I have. My parents were loving, caring, and they always pointed out the things that were going wrong. If I cleaned up my room, my mom would say, well, great job, but you still left the cup out. Or if I didn't do the math homework, she would say, well, good for you that you did, your English, but math, you'll never get into college. Now, who can relate to that? That we have these tendencies to look at the things that are not working. And feel free to share anything about what I'm talking about in the chat today. I'm keeping an eye on it here on the side where I can read the chat. So at PEP, we teach something called positive parenting. And that is, we're going to take a strength-based approach to parenting and our children. We all have these areas that we excel in, and we all have these areas we're not so strong in. But once we start looking for the things that are really working, the strengths that our kids have, the strengths that maybe we have, that's what's going to kind of bridge those challenges we have. And I'm going to give you an example how this is something that kind of we do in life. If you ever bought a car, and maybe you didn't think it was a popular car, you get the car, you get in it, you drive, you're driving around with it, you start looking around, and all of a sudden you see your car everywhere. You never even saw it before. But now that you have this car, you're used to looking for it and you see it everywhere. And that's the shift we want to create within ourselves and in our kids, to really start looking at what are the things that are working so that we can really use those and make things that are working even bigger. So, oops. And you know what? I don't seem to have, oh, okay. So positive parenting, there are really 2 questions that are at the very core of positive parenting. And those are the questions you can keep at the back of your mind moving forward, not just in this conversation, but in any conversation that you think about when it comes to parenting. 1, what are the needs of the situation? And think about this scenario. It's time for your kids to go onto Zoom because a session is starting, and here you are. Breakfast hasn't been eaten, the computer isn't on, maybe the battery is empty, nobody knows where the charger is, and suddenly getting on the Zoom becomes a big ordeal. And when we talk to our kids, we are really upset, and it's like one thing is leading to the next. You never turn on the computer, who was responsible for the, for charging the laptop, and we get lost in the weeds. When we look at positive parenting, we're really just looking at what is the need of this situation and what's the next step. And sometimes that can really be a powerful shift from taking away all the distractions and just saying, we just need to get on the computer right now. And it can be a way to get us to take just that next step, and then the next step, and then the next step, versus seeing everything at the same time. And the second thing is, am I modeling respect? This seems like a very simple thing, but when we think about yelling. Now, who's ever yelled at their child before? I have. When we do that, we're certainly not modeling respect. Now, this is not to make anybody wrong, but just to think about when we're modeling respect, we can do that to a 2-year-old, we can do that to a 10-year-old, we can do that to a 22-year-old. But when we show up in a way that's respectful to the other person, and by the way, respect means it's okay to have different opinions, it's okay to disagree, and we're going to do that in a respectful way. So those are the 2 core beliefs that we're going to have in everything that we're going to talk about today. Before we go into, teaching you some tools and opening this up, because certainly any questions that are coming up, I'm going to look to see in the chat, how does this apply to you? If you're stuck in a particular area or looking for a specific strategy in a particular area, make sure that you share that with us so that we can bring that into the conversation. Now, here are a couple of habits that we are going to call powerless habits. Remember, this is not about making ourselves wrong. We've all been in those places where we've been really, really, really stressed, and we just don't show up the way we really want to show up. So these are just some habits. If you're listening to this webinar right now, and you happen to be with a second person, you can even try some of these things right now. For example, a powerless habit is standing above the child. That seems really simple, but if you're with somebody right now, just try this out. One person sits and the other person just stands, hovers over you, and might even say, put the coffee cup away. What does that feel like? As a child, we already know, or our children know, that we're in authority. And here we are hovering over them, especially the younger children, the 5-year-olds. Now, my son he's 19, and he has been taller than I am. I'm 5'1" if I'm standing up really straight, but he's been taller than me for a long time. But just keep in mind that when we're talking to a younger child, our intention may not be to come across as military style, but just the mere fact that we're hovering over them, we're looking down at them, can be quite intimidating and can put them on the defensive. How about yelling from another room? Now, for me, I know that I've been in the living room. I can hear one of my kids bringing the dishes, which I know that they shouldn't have been taken out of the kitchen to begin with, but they did. They're taking them out of the room. I'm sitting in the living room, and I can hear that those dishes are not going into the dishwasher. And what have I done? Put the dishes in the dishwasher. How many times do I have to tell you? Has this happened to you? Yelling from the other room, it just doesn't model a lot of respect. Usually what happens with our kids, you might get a smirky answer like, yeah, I know. If your kids are, I see the 14 and 16-year-old, you might get the rolling of the eyes. It just doesn't have a lot of cooperation and connection. Another one is using discouraging language. Feel free to put into the chat what you think discouraging language is. Because things like, you'll never go to college. You'll never get the grade. That doesn't feel good. How about words like, well, if you can't do that, how do you ever expect to do that? I think sometimes we use that language because we are, as parents, are so, for me, for sure, that sense of helplessness that, I've shared this with you. This is a simple step, and yet they're not doing it. And then we resort to these kinds of generalizations. You'll never, always. What are some other things that you can think of that are discouraging that you could say to a child? Oh, yes, sighing, yes. Yeah, exactly, sighing. So there are lots of things that we sometimes do, and we don't mean to discourage our children. I know one of the things that I've heard parents use, and I'm sure I've used it in the 22 years that I've been a parent, is if you want to do this, you'll never be able to do it with that mindset. And of course, that there's no encouragement in that at all.
Another good one we have from the audience is, are you going to stick to it this time?
Yes. Oh, that's a great one. That's a great one. Absolutely. I've said that too when we went through this whole phase of trying out different things, but never sticking to anything. So there's a great book that you might find helpful that I'm just going to plug in here. It's called Duct Tape Parenting. It's a great book to help us, like, when not to say those things. And there are, that was a great example. There are lots of these little habits that we do that aren't supporting our children. And I think we do them sometimes just because we're so frustrated and we just want our kids to succeed. And I'm going to switch gears and go into some tools. And with every tool I'm going to share with you, feel free to ask a question that we can look at with that tool. Now, right now, we're in a unique situation because not only are we, for many of us, working from home, which may be something we never intended to do. We're living at home, we're playing at home. I know I have a client, he is a wealth analyst and he's working at home. And as I was talking to him, he said, I just can't do this anymore. My 9-year-old keeps banging on the door. He says, there's a lot of money involved with my clients. How can I get my 9-year-old just to settle down so that I can focus? So everything is different these days. And even if you do have an office or a room, doesn't mean that your child who used to be at school for 6 and 8 hours during the day, they're at home now too. So you're managing lots of things at the same time. Our first tool is gaining your child's cooperation. And that's so important because no matter how old your children are, you can gain their cooperation by just listening to them. I'm going to show you that whenever we have a conversation, we really have multiple conversations going on. Let me show you what I mean. Who noticed some thinking going on? What is she doing? Why is she doing this? How long is the break? When we have a conversation with our kids, what are the things that are going on in your mind? It's so easy to already have a solution in mind. And when we have a solution in mind, we really aren't listening. Listening really means being completely present and not just hearing, but really getting curious about what our children have to say. When somebody feels heard, that goes such a long way. To listening to your child, you could just even rephrase. If they're sharing with you something that's happened on Zoom, or maybe they dropped off, or you could, instead of saying, oh, that's nothing to worry about, or, if I were in your shoes, I'd be just glad that I have one friend at all. We sometimes do that because we want to support our kids. But when we listen, we're also curious about how they're feeling. I imagine that felt pretty frustrating, or you could even ask them, how did that make you feel? So really listening to the child. And 2, asking your child for preferences. Now, when we're talking about working and living and playing from home and pet care from home, there's a lot that we have to coordinate. And a couple of tools that might help you here just to make a little bit more space is to have designated work areas, both for your child and for yourself, and maybe for you and your parenting partner. Make designated areas and have your child to say so. Asking for their preference, a really good rule of thumb is to have 2 choices for your children. So think about this. If I ask you, where do you want to work? That opens up to everything. But when you ask, do you want to work in the dining room table or do you want to work in the kitchen? Your child has got choice. They're able to articulate their preference, but they're really only 2 choices. And maybe those are the choices that you're okay with too. Finding balance at home also means having a certain amount of structure. So I know sometimes kids are working on school in different times than you are working or trying to get stuff done. So really sitting down, particularly with your high school kids, what are some schedules that would work for both of you? And sometimes that might involve you modifying your schedule a little bit. Sometimes, when our kids have to go to school for certain pre-designated times, there's not much they can do that. But maybe you can have a different meeting time with a client, or maybe you're able to shift things around just a little bit to create a little bit of space. Again, asking your children for their ideas. One of the things that I think is a great way, I call it 15 in 1. Get a timer. You can get them on Amazon. You could use your mobile phone, your cell phone. Set it on 60 seconds and come up with a minimum of 15 ideas to the solution or to what it is that you're wanting to talk about in 1 minute. 15 ideas in 1 minute. Now don't filter, because the filtering comes later, but just get creative, because sometimes you don't even know some of the possibilities that are out there until you start really getting creative. And the last thing is speak respectfully. I know one time my son had this really creative way of doing the dishes, which was, I think, doing the dishes every other day. We're a family, it's myself and 3 kids. We can't do the dishes every other day. So what came up for me is right away, are you crazy? But we can't say that. We can just listen and go, okay, well, that's one possibility. What are some other possibilities? So speaking respectfully, remember our kids are not just learning what you're saying, but they're learning about problem solving when you're engaging them in this process. Another thing that might help as you're talking about gaining your child's cooperation during this particular time is scheduling breaks. I had a client who was very frustrated because he said, his clients, he had to work for 9 hours every day. And he was very frustrated because he had a 7-year-old at home, single dad. He had to take care of the 7-year-old. So what he started doing is scheduling 5 minutes every single hour and just put that on his calendar. Now, it wasn't very long, but because he kept checking in with his child every hour just for 5 minutes, that really made a difference in that child's life, and it made a difference in the way that they were connecting. Did it work right from the beginning? No. But after 2 or 3 days of trying this out, the child started to know, okay, dad really means this. Those are my 5 minutes. And sometimes it was just sitting, sometimes it was just checking in, sometimes it was problem solving, but the child knew those 5 minutes belonged to me. And for the dad, it was really more of a de-stressor because, now he knew that he could check in, the child was okay, and he could be there for his child. Now, again, that's what worked for in this situation, but you might find with an older child, maybe a 9-year-old or a 13-year-old, that checking in every 3 hours work. And especially with the older kids, ask them, if I check in with you every 3 hours, how does that sit with you? How does that work with you? Get them to start taking ownership of solving this problem. Another nice thing that seems to work for a lot of people is having lunch with your kids. When we used to go out for work, we would meet with people during lunchtime. You can do the same. It doesn't mean you have to spend the entire hour with your child, but 15 minutes, let's have lunch together. So that there are those points throughout the day and you're going away from just being in that frustration mode. Now, before I switch on to tool number 2, I just want to check in and see, are there any questions around gaining your child's cooperation or anything that stands out for you, or some clarification on anything on tool number 1? I'm checking the...
And parents and community, you are invited to put your camera on and unmute and ask any questions or give any feedback at this point if you want. I know folks are very impressed with having whole family lunchtime. We used to do that in the old country, and it's really nice to have that silver lining back in our homes nowadays.
And it doesn't have to be fancy or anything like that. But, sometimes our kids start to get, they start to show up in that sort of anxious way just because they want more of us. And when we can start putting those little moments in, can go a long way. And does not mean it has to be fancy or anything like that. It can just mean those 15 minutes, our favorite distractors are put aside, and we're just connecting with our kids for those 15 minutes.
I want to say thank you. And as you're sharing, one of the things that I think is really interesting is trying to keep it positive. And I know something that I experienced this from 2 sides, from one working for MCPS and having elementary age student, a high school age student, and a college age student. And we're all at home on Zoom together and doing all this stuff from many different rooms. So I really appreciate we're in the same house and we're so distant from one another. And so I want to say thank you for that idea of just like a dinner time. Well, let's do, it's an opportunity for us to really engage. So I really want to try to do that as a family lunchtime. A separate thing is keeping it positive. All of his things ready and stay engaged and stay positive. It's really something that's tough for me to stay positive when I know you should have your stuff ready for the class. And so I'm going to do my best to stay positive, so that it can keep him positive for learning. But I see parents from now my work as, in the school system, as I watch parents going through the same thing and getting their kids back on. But no matter what, we have to be creative in that positive side. We just have to find that way. So I really thank you for that, and the realities coming into my mind on both sides. So thank you so much.
And thank you. You bring up some really, really, really important points, because we are all in a tough situation. I mean, some people are struggling with job security. Other people are struggling with, special needs child. Other people have never wanted to do homeschooling and are now finding that they're homeschoolers. So it's so easy to get our mind, going in the wrong direction, and it just doesn't support us. And we do have to bring, we have to make sure that we as parents are fueling our cup all the time with walks, little meditations, little breaks, fueling ourselves up, because, as you were saying, it's not an easy time right now. And we kind of have to make sure that we are staying in that good space. So thank you for bringing some of those points up, because they're really important. And I'm going to say, with being positive, they did some studies that showed, that looked at positivity versus, and some people say, well, I'm just being realistic. You maybe have heard that, I'm just being realistic. And they found that people who are seeing life more realistic, let's say, that in life, they did get things right more often. However, the people that generally tended to be more optimistic, they took more risks, they were more resilient, and actually got further along, because when something happened, they were more able to lean into it and say, okay, well, this didn't work out, let me try again. So that's something to keep in the mind. It's not just about being optimistic. When we think of optimism, we sometimes think about pretending like things are not the way they are. And that's not what PEP is all about. It's about saying, well, things are challenging sometimes, but there is something positive about it. So thank you for bringing that up. And I'm going to shift to tool number 2, which is, promoting self-discipline. And self-discipline is really interesting, because my dad was a military dad. And when he talked about discipline, what he really meant was the drill sergeant who gave commands and people had to follow commands. Now, when I'm in a group, I sometimes say, raise your hand if that's been your experience with discipline. But at the very root, the word discipline comes from a Latin word, means the Latin word is disciplina, and that means instruction. And discipline is also about instructing, about teaching. How do we regulate our emotions? How do we communicate? It's getting what I just heard about, getting ready for school, taking on ownership, those kinds of things. And promoting self-discipline for our children means that we also allow for mistakes and differences. I know, for example, my son has a very different learning style. He's very science and math oriented, and sometimes it would just bewilder me how this child learned anything at all. When we talked about self-discipline, we focused on the outcome. So, we would talk about, what are we agreeing on? What are you, and I would ask him, what are you committing to getting done by whatever, Wednesday or whenever it needed to be done? What are you committing to? And I put it on my son. How he chose to get there, that was on him. What was important for me was that I knew that we were both on the same page. The project needs to be complete by a certain time. We would break it down. So if the poster was done on Friday, where are you? I would ask him, where are you going to be on Wednesday? Tell me, how far is the project going to be on Wednesday? And sometimes that didn't work, but it wasn't about making wrong, but it was about, okay, well, we see that didn't work. What are you going to do now? So discipline is also about teaching. I'm going to say something about keeping expectations. Keeping expectations, I had a dad or family that were telling me that they had all this work that they had to do, and their 10-year-old was expected to basically homeschool, make dinners, and all of this by themselves. Now, it's not that they were being unreasonable in the sense, because this is his job, this is how he's paying for school and for all of this, but at the same time, it's unreasonable. It's not, we have to think about, where are our children developmentally? Where are they on their own growth spurt? So for example, younger children, I don't see that we can have, that we have very young children here, but young children, when we're talking about kindergarten, they need a lot more touch points, because they are just exploring their own capabilities. When we talk about kids who are in middle school, here our job description starts to switch a little bit. Before, we're managing everything for our children. And even in this online world that we have right now, our kids need to take ownership and learn how to navigate, learn how to problem solve if they're not particularly technology savvy. Instead of us always stepping in saying, okay, let me just solve this problem for you, stepping back and going, how could you solve this problem? Who could you talk to? What are some resources? And allowing them and expecting them. That's an expectation that we can all have for our children, that they're good at solving problems, and how can we support them on solving these technology problems now? And the last is to model positive practices. I think this is really important because, sometimes we talk about being positive or taking care of ourselves when our kids are frustrated because they've been sitting at Zoom for 6 hours. So even telling our kids, I know when my kids come to me sometimes, and I run everything on Zoom and online platforms, and I tell them, they come and they say, oh, I need to ask you a question. This is really important. And I will just tell them and say, I hear you. It sounds like you need some time. And I tell them, right now I've had 6 hours of online meetings, and I feel like I'm not going to be in a good space if I have this conversation with you. And give me 15 minutes. I'm just going to take a little walk outside and then I'll come back. That's perfectly okay to do. We don't always feel like we need to jump right in. We can model to our children that we all need some space right now. And by the way, when we're modeling that for our children, they start seeing, oh, okay, I guess that is okay for me to do. Or how do I say no when, the next meeting comes up and you feel like you've had your limit yourself. So modeling really goes a long way. And I can certainly say, I grew up with do as I say, not as I do. And it's a lot more impactful. Our children are like sponges. And even later when we have teenagers and we think that they're not paying attention to us or they're just rolling their eyes, they're watching. So even modeling some of that positive behavior of saying, I need a break right now, or sharing feelings like, telling our kids, I feel totally exhausted because I've been on the computer so much. I wonder how you're feeling. That's a great way to connect with your child, to model some positive behavior and to promote some discipline. Now, again, particularly in this online environment, keeping expectations real. A teenager, we can have different expectations than a middle school child, and just keeping that at the back of our mind. Now, I'm going to switch to tool number 3, because I think this is a really important one. Will support what we've talked about so far. If you do have any questions on anything that I've talked about in discipline, and I'm looking over at the chat, please do post it or just raise your hand. But the third one is solving problems together. Now, who's noticed that it's so much easier often to just swoop in and solve the problems our kids have than sitting there and watching our kids struggle through some of these problems? Or I know I've certainly been there, and I'm like, let me just do this for you. But the challenge is that our kids don't learn that much. And when you think about, your own learning and your own growth in life, if I were to ask you right now, what's been a really tough moment in your life? We could all think of something. And then if I ask you, what did you learn from that? We are shaped by not just the good days in our lives, we're also shaped by the struggles we have. And when we have a child who is struggling, or we as a family are struggling, this is a great opportunity. It's always a learning opportunity. And these are the steps. There are 5 steps to solve problems together with your children. The first step is defining the problem in 2 or 3 words. Now, notice it says on there, leave people out of the problem, and see what this sounds like. If I tell you, I've been in Zoom meetings all day, table hasn't been set. I can't believe you never set the table. You know, I'm really hungry. I'm so disappointed. You know, all you had to do is set the table. Versus dinner's, you know, we're supposed to have dinner, table has not been set. What does that feel like when you hear the second part? Table hasn't been set. It takes out any kind of blaming. It takes out any kind of you should have. It takes out all of the emotions. So I'm going to invite you right now, think of a parenting challenge that you have and think about at the very core, what is it really about? Leave out all people, no you, nor I. It's just what is it about? So maybe for us, we have 3 cats. The litter box has sometimes been a bit of a challenge. And instead of saying, you know, if you want to have this cat, it's your responsibility, because immediately my daughter would lean into, I'm doing the best I can. Other parents do the litter box. We'd immediately go into this kind of struggle. When I show up and say, the problem is litter box is dirty. It's just a fact. That's how it is. The second step is brainstorming all possibilities. Again, I'm going to invite you to do 15 in 1. A 9-year-old, even a 2-year-old can come up with creative ideas. Keep in mind that your kids have ideas that may work even though they seem a little bit off to you. I remember when my son was in middle school, it was his turn to do the dishwasher and it just never got done. It never got done. And we tried to solve this problem together because the dishes were always a bit of a challenge for us. And he had this idea that he would come home, he would start homework, he would empty part of the dishwasher, then he would go and have a snack, then he would empty the rest of the dishwasher. Now, in my mind, I thought, this is never going to work because, let's face it, he's going to get distracted and that dishwasher is going to be full by the time I need it so I can put stuff in it again. But we tried it out and it actually worked. I think it worked for like 2 months and then we had to revisit it. But it worked. So brainstorm all possibilities and make sure that your kids are creatively, you know, you might even say, I don't know if I can think of anything else. What else is there? If we had creative ideas. So you can really encourage them to try some things. And then again, just pick something. Now you can either do consensus. Everybody has to agree on the problem. In general, that works better. Than doing majority rules, because that usually means that somebody is left out. If you're able to do consensus, that's the ideal way. And then try a solution. Now here we suggest trying a solution for 5 days. We used to say 2 weeks, but you could even try a solution for 3 days. Now remember, when we try something new, it might not take off right away. So 5 days, 3 days, give yourself enough space so that you can actually try on this new idea. And make sure after the 5 days, you come back and evaluate the effectiveness. And you want to make sure to do that even if the problem has been resolved. So when you choose the whatever solution you want to try on, put it on your calendar. You know, kids, a 9-year-old that sees you putting a meeting time in the calendar with your child so that you can evaluate whatever solution, that means something. Kids know only important stuff gets put on the calendar. So put that in right away and you can tell your child, okay, we'll check back in. Now, if the problem has been resolved, you can say, this was really great. I'm seeing this is working. And you can even ask your child. Sometimes I ask my kids, what do you think? Do we need can we take this on now? And your child you might be surprised actually, and your child might say, no, I want to try something different, or yeah, this is great. But at least you're showing them that this is important. Now, these are the 5 steps, and they're in your handout. And you know, before you leave this call tonight, just think about a situation, bedtime routines, getting people to dinner on time. Those are kind of those sticky areas, and see what that could look like when you go through these 5 steps. And I'm going to shift to the powerful habits. And again, I'm going to ask you to share some of the powerful habits that you might want to add. But getting ready first, those last minute things cause a lot of stress, and getting ready first, that could mean anything. Give yourself a little bit of time, knowing that when you're able to be a little bit less stressed, your kids feel that. Again, equalizing distance between you and your child. When you think about when somebody speaks to you at eye level, that goes a long way. Also, body language. When you're talking to your child, in the photo that we're seeing, this dad or this parent is sitting there with his daughter, and they're kind of side by side. But when you're having a conversation with your child, make sure that not just your voice is communicating, your whole body. Turn towards your child. Sometimes we're busy doing something else while we're having this conversation. Turn towards your child. Equalize distance. Look at them. Look in their eyes, and really let them feel like, yes, that my parents is present. And using encouraging language, and that is language that shows them that you're paying attention. I saw that you were able to resolve that challenge. I wonder how you're going to resolve this challenge. Have some faith in your children, even though it might be a little bit scary and there's this fear and worry in you, but have some faith that your kids are going to be able to figure this out, and be encouraging. Point out wins. Little things like going into your child's room, looking around. I've done this a lot with my kids, just stating what you see, like all the dirty clothes are in the dirty clothes bin. It just shows your child that you're paying attention. Those little things add up. And I want to add some things to these powerful habits. And that is, I want to think about letting go of perfection and making progress a powerful habit. Sometimes we are looking for that perfect way of being or doing or getting it just right. And that's so exhausting, especially right now when we have all these demands. So it's the process. It's being on that journey of going somewhere without having that pressure of it needs to be right. And embracing patience. We all need a little bit of patience. Our kids are going through a lot of stress as well right now. So just embracing a little bit more patience can go a long way. I also want to add on there some powerful habits for parents, and that is make sure that your cup is always filled. Starting the day with a 2-minute meditation or mindfulness moment. It doesn't have to be the 60-minute meditation, but the 2 minutes. Being intentional about how you want to show up during the day, and taking time to refuel and recharge your own battery goes such a long way. Sometimes I just sit in front of my home with a cup of tea, just enjoying looking at the birds, just a few moments. And doing those few moments, those few moments throughout the day go a lot further than waiting all week until Saturday. There's that one thing that you're looking for. But putting in those little moments throughout the whole week can make sure that you keep yourself recharged, like a battery that's always full. And when your battery is full, and you probably have noticed this as well, when you're in a good state, it's so much easier to problem solve. So making sure that your powerful habits are also for you. And there's some really great stress buster breathing techniques that you can put in there, which is the breathing in for a count of 4, holding the breath for a count of 7, and exhaling through your mouth through a count of 8. And just repeating that maybe 3 or 4 times. You can do that at your desk. If you've been sitting at your desk for a long time, standing up just to kind of re-energize, maybe walk in place for a moment, just re-energize yourself. Leg circles are great, just standing up and just circling your leg around a little bit, just anything to get yourself moving to make sure that your energy is going the way you want it to go. And lastly, we can't leave without thinking about the common pitfalls. My mom was amazing, and she did a lot of lecturing. She used to stand there and she said, let me tell you about. And when you think about your own parenting experience, how much did you learn from the lecturing? Again, it's one of those things parents do because, well, we're a little bit afraid that we're going to miss something, or we're frustrated that we're not getting the point across. But, it's not effective. So the next time you feel yourself going, but maybe just stepping back and asking yourself, what's another way I could say it? Or can I let this one go? Ignoring reality in any direction. Sometimes we just need to see the problem as it is. Sometimes our kids are really not doing well in something, and we can just talk about how we need to address this. This is not you should have, could have, need to, but just saying, well, this is where we are. Again, the needs of the situation. So this math is not working out. Needs of the situation, passing the class. And especially with the older kids, what do you think we can do here? So really being real. Having unreasonable and unrealistic expectations. I mean, some kids are really good at one thing and not so much the other. But when we have realistic expectations and are keeping in our mind, this is where 14-year-olds are, or 16-year-olds. They're on this part of the growth spectrum where they're trying to push away the expectation that they're going to do everything and be happy with family life. Not so much. Versus the young children who need more of that hands-on. They want to be part of you all the time for most of the kids. So really looking at, how old is my child? What do I really want out of the situation? And is that something that is really serving them or me? And being inconsistent. Now, if I were to ask, who's had a challenge with consistency? We get tired, we get worn out, and then what do? We say, just this one time. Think about being consistent. So start with the outcome in mind first and ask yourself, well, if we're going to choose to say this is how it needs to be done, will I be able to uphold this? And if the answer for you is no, then look for another solution. Because when we're inconsistent with our kids, we're telling them that we're not reliable. I mean, think about it. If you never quite know, is my dad going to be upset? Is mom going to say yes or no? But when kids know, we always had, for example, grown-up time. 9 p.m. was grown-up time. Any kind of permission slips that were handed in to me after 9 p.m. didn't get processed that late in the evening. And that was just my rule because I had stuff to do. I was tired. It was so hard for me when one night my son said, if you don't sign this and don't fill it out for tomorrow, then I'm not going to be able to go on the field trip. Now, we had a problem with filling out permission slips. So this wasn't a one-off. This was sort of a consistent problem we'd had. And every part of me wanted to say, well, okay, just this one time. The problem was it was always just this one time. Do you see where I'm going with this? So when we switched to 9 o'clock meant 9 o'clock, not 9:30. And the kids knew I was really being real with this. It switched. So he actually ended up not being able to go on that field trip, which just broke my heart. And it was the last time ever we had that challenge because he knew I was dependable. It was really tough to do, but that solved and broke that pattern once and for all. Yelling and bribing. Now, sometimes we think, if you eat the broccoli, you'll get the chocolate. If you do this, you'll get that. And that's not a long-term strategy to build connection, rapport, and to help support our children in their growth. Bribing works in the moment, but it does nothing to really support the relationship. So yeah, every once in a while, we're all in those moments where it's a one-off. All right, but bribing as a strategy isn't very effective. Now, the last thing I want to say is have fun. We think about parenting, and when we had our children to begin with, most of us wanted to have all these wonderful moments with our children. Most of us did not say, well, I'm going to have this baby and, they need to make all A's, they need to. And sometimes we get lost in all the things that we have to do. Think about what do you want to remember about that time? What do you want your children to remember? Sometimes it's okay. Just put things down and say, you know what? Let's go for a walk together. Or let's just have a fun evening. Let's make popcorn together. Or in the past 2 months, we've done a lot of things outdoors. We've taken walks. We've done picnics. None of those things have been expensive. None of those things have been big. We've had theme nights at home, with the rule being we can only have theme nights with stuff that we have at home. But have fun with your kids, because those are the things that connect you and remind you of why you had kids to begin with. And it's so easy to get lost when we have a lot of stress. So whatever it is you're doing with all the tools and strategy, make sure that you're putting some fun in as a family. And by the way, with your parenting, if you're parenting with somebody, with your parenting partner, we used to have parents' night in, Friday nights. The kids knew that was parents' night in. Kids were around, they were at home, but they ate separately, they had to go to bed, and that was our time. So have fun with your parenting partner, have fun with your kids, and just enjoy the parenting journey. So I want to share and round things off, because if you do, I want to make sure we have a couple of minutes here for any questions, that this is the beginning of a conversation. PEP has a range of programs, whether you're looking at how do I specifically deal with temper tantrums, or how do I deal with anger, when my kids are really angry, when I'm really angry, how do I stay encouraging? Make sure to check out the programs that PEP offers. There are live webinars from noted authors, parenting authors. Some of the programs are free, some of them cost $25. There are 4-week programs that are a little bit like tonight, except you're within a community, you taught some tools, and you have an opportunity to talk to other parents and, how do these tools work? How are you using them? What is working? What isn't working? So those are the offerings that PEP has. And we invite you to take a look at the website, sign up, continue this conversation, because like with anything, it's that one-off where you eat a good salad and you're like, oh, that was really so good, or you switch to a healthy balanced diet where you feel much better long-term. Sometimes it's nice to have that additional support to make sure you're staying on that long-term strategy and on that path, so that when your kids get older, you will have forgotten a lot of the challenges and problems, but having older kids and knowing that you have that connection, that rapport, that you're there for each other really goes a long way. So it was a pleasure presenting this for you. And as we round off, there's one more thing, and this is the moment where I'm going to ask you to bring out your cell phone, or for you to open another window in your computer browser. And we're going to do one final little exercise, because I really want to know, and I'm curious to see what all what stood out for you. What was the thing that, and let me make sure that I'm sharing the proper screen here.
And while Nicoletta is doing that, you'll see in the chat that I've dropped a link to the Menti that she's going to use for feedback with the code.
Yes, thank you so much. So this is how this works, because I would love to know some of the insights, some of the aha moments that you might have had. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to go, and you will either open a new browser window in your computer, or you can use your computer, your small computer, and you're going to go to a website called Menti. So you're going to type in www.menti.com, and it's going to ask you for a code. And the code that it's going to ask you to enter is 5583680. Now, if you're looking at the screen, it looks like there's some spaces in there, but when you're entering it, there's no need to enter the spaces. It's just so that we can see the numbers a little easier. So I'm curious, what was it that stood out for you? Maybe you had an insight or an aha moment. What stood out for you after tonight's conversation? So I'm seeing modeling, fun, fun, age-appropriate behavior, perfection behind. What are some other things that are standing out for you, or that insights maybe that you've had tonight? Respect. Listening, modeling. And as you're watching this and are adding to this, you see that the thing that most people are writing in on is the age appropriate. It's getting the biggest. The spending the 5 minutes, creativity, cooperation. Spending 5 minutes. Yeah, it's so powerful. We think of the big time that we have to spend, but really it's the moments. And I see patience. Yeah, leaving perfection behind. And fun. So I want to leave you this morning and spend the remaining couple of minutes with any questions you have. I'm going to leave this up for another moment for you to keep sharing your insights and aha moments. And if there are any other questions, or you have a specific question even for a parenting problem or challenge that you're facing, we still have a couple of minutes, and I'm very happy to take those on if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta, and feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions as we close out this evening. We want to encourage everyone to fill out the feedback form that's been dropped in the chat, as well as visit us for any future Parent Academy workshops at mcps.parentacademy.org. And we thank you for your Parent Academy Go support.